staircase whose sophisticated construction seemed all too perfect to be real. Was it built by a saint? Corpses from a New Mexico cemetery that for some reason refused to decay? And is the lost treasure of the Knights Templar real? These are unsolved historical mysteries experts can't explain. In Santa Fe, New Mexico, there's a staircase that's baffled people for over a century. The Loretto Chapel was built in 1878, but when it was finished, a problem came up. There was no way to access the choir loft, 22 feet above the main floor. Carpenters were called in, but all of them agreed that a staircase wouldn't fit in the small chapel without disrupting the space. So the sisters of the chapel, in a desperate bid, prayed to Saint Joseph, the patron saint of carpenters. And the story goes that on the 9th and final day of their prayers, a man showed up with nothing but a donkey and a toolbox. He went to work on the staircase, and months later, a beautiful spiral staircase was completed. But the carpenter just disappeared without a trace, never even taking payment. Locals even put out an ad in the paper looking for him, but he was never seen again. Some believe this mysterious carpenter was Saint Joseph himself, answering the sisters' prayers. And it's not just because he mysteriously disappeared. The staircase is unlike anything anyone had seen before. It has 2 full 360-degree turns and seemed to defy physics with no visible support. It's said to have been built entirely with wooden pegs, not nails. Experts still don't know what type of wood was used either. And to this day, the identity of the builder and the methods used to construct it are still unsolved. In the town of San Bernardo, Colombia in 1957, a flood hit the local cemetery, forcing workers to move the bodies. But when they did, they found that many of the corpses were completely preserved, as though they'd been mummified naturally, despite having been buried for a long time. One of the workers immediately alerted the authorities, and when the bodies were examined, they found not just the corpses, but also the clothes that they were buried in were still in remarkably good condition. This wasn't the case for other graves in the area though, where bodies had decayed to bones. What's even stranger still is that the mummies didn't show any signs of embalming, which would be expected if they'd been intentionally preserved. Could the high altitude or the unique diet of the local people have had something to do with it? Well, sure, but that still doesn't explain why the clothes of the mummies hadn't decayed either. It's also odd that San Bernardo is the only town in the area where mummified remains were found. Today, some of these mummies are displayed in a museum, and they still haven't decayed even without any attempts to preserve them. One of England's most famous historical mysteries revolves around the death of 2 young princes, Edward V and Richard, who vanished while imprisoned in the Tower of London in 1483. The 2 boys were the sons of King Edward IV and were the next in line for the throne. But after their father's death, they were declared illegitimate by their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who became Richard III. The 2 princes were placed in the tower, and in the summer of 1483, they disappeared without a trace. Some believe they were killed, possibly on the orders of Richard III, to secure his claim to the throne. Some believe the princes were secretly taken out and buried in a hidden chamber in the tower. In 1674, bones were discovered near the tower, and though they were assumed to be the remains of the princes, modern analysis hasn't been able to prove this conclusively. The Knights Templar. These were a powerful medieval order of warrior monks, and their downfall in the early 14th century supposedly left behind one of the greatest lost treasures in history. In 1307, King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the Templars, ordered for their arrest. Accusing them of heresy and other charges, the knights were tormented into confession, and the order was officially disbanded by Pope Clement V. But it was said that the Templars had hid this vast amount of treasure with gold and priceless relics. The most famous legend is that the treasure was hidden somewhere in Scotland, some say under Rosslyn Chapel, or buried deep beneath the ocean. There have been expeditions, but the treasure has, of course, never been found. It's still one of the greatest mysteries of the Middle Ages. So we often don't associate Sasquatch with history, and with supposed Bigfoot footage and reports flooding in all the time, it seems like such a modern phenomenon. But the creature has been part of Native American folklore for who knows how long. Before settlers even made their way west, stories of big hairy ape creatures had been passed down for centuries. But in the 1800s, newspapers started picking up on these strange reports coming from the frontier, especially in the Pacific Northwest. One newspaper even described the forests as being, quote, brimming with giant wild men and wood apes. The reports were pretty consistent. People said these creatures were big, walked upright, and had a terrible smell. One old account even referred to Bigfoot as the bad-smelling tree man. Around the same time, in 1865, a guy named George Gibbs started recording stories from Native American communities about the creatures. Some settlers brushed it off as myths, but by the early 1900s, there were official reports of Bigfoot sightings. And as we all know, Sasquatch's legend has only gotten bigger over time. Tarrare was a Frenchman in the late 1700s who had an extremely unusual condition, an insatiable hunger. And not only would he eat mass amounts of food, he'd eat pretty much anything he could fit into his mouth. He'd go as far as eating live animals like cats, dogs, and eels. One story goes that he even ate a snake after peeling off its skin. His eating habits were so bizarre that people started taking notice, and he became this kind of one-man circus act. He'd perform in the town square, and he'd eat just bizarre things like pocket watches, corks, live animals, all in front of shocked and terrified crowds. Doctors had no idea what was going on with this guy. They figured he had some sort of stomach issue that prevented him from feeling full. As for what that was, though, nobody knew. Eventually, he was hospitalized, and that's where things got deeply disturbing. At one point, nurses found him eating parts of corpses. Tarrare died at just 26 after experiencing continuous exudative diarrhea. Surgeons decided to do an autopsy, and apparently his insides were just a complete mess. Can't imagine why. Next up is the mystery of the 9th Roman Legion. Around 100 to 190 CE, the Roman Empire was set on conquering Caledonia, now known as Scotland. To do that, they sent the 9th Legion, a military unit that had already proven itself in battle across the empire. The soldiers were never seen again. At some point, they just disappeared. There's no official record of what happened to them, and considering how meticulous the Romans were about keeping track of their military, that is pretty strange. Some people think the entire legion was wiped out in such a humiliating way that no one wanted to document it. Disappearance is even rumored to be one of the main reasons why Hadrian's Wall was built, as a defensive measure against whatever had taken out that 9th Legion. In 1885, a man named Guillermo Farini, also known as William Leonard Hunt, made a strange claim, saying he'd found this mysterious city in the Kalahari Desert. He reported his discovery to both the Berlin Geographical Society and the Royal Geographical Society of Great Britain. He even published a book that year describing what he found. In it, he described strange rock formations that he believed were the ruins of some ancient city. Farini figured this city was thousands of years old, though he couldn't find any inscriptions or clear evidence to back that up. Over time, though, rumors spread about this supposed lost city, even among local indigenous people who claimed that they hadn't been the ones who built it, though. Other explorers and historians like Gustave Prelude went looking for the city, claiming the locals could lead them to the ruins, but after more searches, nothing concrete came up. Some even claimed to have seen quarries or shipwrecks in the middle of the desert, but these stories never panned out. Professor A.J. Clement tested Farini's theory and concluded that Farini probably didn't even reach the Kalahari Desert. Instead, he likely found some natural rock formations that, over time, looked man-made when they were eroded. The search for the city continues to be a mystery, but many now consider it more of a myth. In 1909, the SS Waratah, a large passenger and cargo steamship that operated between Europe and Australia, disappeared without a trace off the coast of South Africa. It was last seen near the Cape of Good Hope, but after that it vanished completely. No distress signals were sent and no wreckage was ever found. The ship had been in service for just a short time, and there were no signs of any problems before it disappeared. Some people think it sank during a storm, but there's no real proof of that. Eerily, though, the Waratah did have a bit of a reputation for strange incidents on board. Some theories say it might have been taken by pirates or hit by a huge wave, but no one knows for sure, and to this day, the Waratah's disappearance is still unsolved. The Beale Ciphers are a set of 3 mysterious documents believed to hold the key to a hidden treasure buried by a man named Thomas J. Beale in the 1820s. According to the story, Beale and a group of adventurers discovered a large treasure of gold, silver, and jewels out in the west, and they supposedly buried it somewhere in Bedford County, Virginia. Supposedly, if you can crack the ciphers, you can find the treasure. The first cipher is said to describe the exact location of the treasure. The second supposedly lists the contents of the treasure, and the third contains the names and contact details of the heirs. Beale left the ciphers with his friend Robert Morris, promising to return with the key to decode them, but Beale never showed up again. Morris shared the ciphers with the public, hoping someone could figure them out, and to date, only the second cipher has been partially decoded. Why anyone would bother with the second and third cipher is beyond me, though. Just tell me where it is, and then I will go and get it. I don't need a list of items if the treasure is right in front of me, and I most definitely do not need the contact info of the people it belongs to, because it will all be coming home with me. With all that said, I've been your host, James. We'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.